The year was 2347, and humanity had only been part of the Galactic Council for 60 years. Among the stars they were still considered newcomers, and a species barely worthy of a seat at the table where elder races had ruled for millennia. The great halls of the council station called Eternal Accord had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, but the humans were still learning how to walk among giants. General Cole stood at the helm of the United Earth Fleet, and she had earned this position through 30 years of service and countless battles, and an unshakable reputation for protecting both her soldiers and the innocent. She was 54 years old with dark hair streaked with silver and eyes that carried the weight of every decision she had ever made. Her soldiers called her the Iron Mother because she was tough as steel, but she cared for every single one of them like they were her own children. The Galactic Council consisted of 12 elder species, and they were led by the Hua beings of crystalline form that considered themselves the moral arbiters of the galaxy. Their bodies looked like living glass and light passed through them in beautiful patterns, but their hearts were cold and calculating. Hai had watched humanity with suspicion since their arrival, and he was convinced that such an aggressive species would eventually need to be contained. He had waited patiently for the right moment to put the humans in their place. The opportunity came when they suffered a devastating attack. There were a peaceful species under Earth's protection and they had trusted humanity to keep them safe. 3 of their colony worlds were reduced to ash in a single night. 200,000 civilians died in the flames. Mothers and children and elders who had never held a weapon were burned alive. The galaxy watched in horror and demanded justice. The Council convened an emergency session on Eternal Accord, and representatives from hundreds of species filled the Great Chamber. Cole was summoned to answer questions about Earth's military movements during the attacks. She came willingly because she had nothing to hide, and she believed that the truth would protect her. She was wrong. Hai stood before the assembly, and his crystalline body glowed with righteous anger. He pointed directly at Cole, and his voice echoed through the chamber like breaking glass. This human general orchestrated the attacks to expand Earth's territory, he declared. We have intercepted communications bearing her authorization codes. We have testimony from survivors who saw Earth vessels among the attackers. The evidence is overwhelming and undeniable. Felt the weight of 1,000 eyes upon her. Species that had once traded with humanity now looked at her with disgust and fear. She understood what was happening. This was not a search for truth. This was a performance designed to humiliate humanity and remind them of their place in the galactic order. She stood in the accused circle with her uniform pristine and her expression unreadable. She knew the evidence was fabricated because she had been on Earth during the attacks. She had been attending her daughter Emma's wedding and dancing with her new son-in-law and crying tears of joy as Emma said her vows. She had photographs and video and hundreds of witnesses who could confirm her presence on Earth. But she also knew the Council did not care about alibis from a species they already distrusted. I am innocent, she said calmly, and her voice did not waver, and humanity will prove it. Hai smiled, and his crystalline face refracted the chamber's light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. You will be detained here until trial. Your species will not interfere or they will face expulsion from the Council and complete economic isolation. Your colonies will starve, your trade routes will be closed, your people will learn the cost of defying the elder races. Guards approached and placed restraints on her wrists. They were made of some alien metal that with energy, and she knew that any attempt to break free would result in painful shocks. She did not resist. She walked with her head held high as they led her away from the chamber, and every human watching the broadcast felt pride in their general, even as their hearts broke. On Earth, the transmission reached President Daniel in the Oval Office. He was a man of 62 years with grey hair and tired eyes, but those eyes burned with cold fury as he watched being led away in chains. His advisors surrounded him and they urged caution because the Council's economic leverage was immense. Humanity's colonies depended on trade routes that the elder species controlled. Millions of human lives could be affected by sanctions. We cannot risk war over one person, said Secretary of State Helen Brooks. The general would understand. She would want us to think of the greater good. Admiral William Hayes stood in the corner of the room, and he had been silent until now. He was friend, and they had served together for 20 years before he took command of the home fleet. He had grey hair cut short and a face lined with decades of hard decisions. With respect, Madam Secretary, he said quietly, you do not know Cole if you think she would want us to abandon her to a show trial. Then what do you suggest, Admiral? We attack the Council, we start a war we cannot win. Hayes walked to the window and looked out at the night sky filled with stars. Somewhere out there his friend was sitting in a cell and waiting to see if humanity would come for her. They are not putting her on trial, he said. They are sending a message. They are telling humanity to know our place, to bow our heads, to accept that we will always be beneath the elder races. President stood and joined Hayes at the window. And if we do nothing? Then we prove them right. We prove that humanity can be pushed around and bullied. Every species in the galaxy will know that Earth does not protect its own. Our allies will lose faith. Our enemies will grow bold, and will die alone knowing that her people abandoned her. The president was silent for a long moment. He thought about the risks and the consequences and the millions of lives that hung in the balance, but he also thought about what kind of nation humanity wanted to be, what kind of species they wanted to become among the stars. He looked at the image of being led away in restraints, with her head held high and her dignity intact. Then I suppose, he said quietly, we need to send a message of our own. Admiral Hayes turned to face the president, and for the first time that night he allowed himself to hope. I have some ideas about that, sir. I thought you might, Admiral, gather your team, we have work to do. And so began the most daring operation in human history. The stars themselves would tremble before it was done. 3 days after her arrest, the Galactic Council announced that her trial would begin in 2 weeks. The proceedings would be broadcast across the galaxy as an example of council justice, and every species would see what happened to those who challenged the elder races. Hai was already planning his victory speech, and he imagined the look on his face when she heard the guilty verdict. But behind closed doors on Earth something was stirring. In the underground complex beneath the Rocky Mountains, a team was gathering in secret. The facility was called Iron Mountain, and it had been built during humanity's early years in space as a command center for planetary. Now it would serve a different purpose. Admiral William Hayes stood at the head of a long table, and around him sat the most capable officers in the human military. Commander Lisa Porter was there, and she led naval intelligence with a sharp mind that could untangle any conspiracy. Colonel Samuel Grant sat across from her, and he commanded the Special Operations Division known only as the Ghosts. They were soldiers who could move through enemy territory like shadows and complete missions that seemed impossible. We have 2 objectives, Admiral Hayes explained while displaying a holographic map of Council space. First, we prove the General's innocence by finding the real attackers. Second, we extract her before the Council can execute whatever sentence they have already decided on. Commander Porter had already begun her work, and she pulled up files on her tablet. I have been analyzing the attack signatures from the colonies. The weapons do not match any known human designs. They have been modified to look like ours, but the energy decay patterns are wrong. Someone went to a lot of trouble to frame us. The Colonel Grant asked. Possibly, or someone who wants humanity and the Council at war. Either way, we need proof. Admiral Hayes slowly, what do you need, Commander? Access to the relay stations in the neutral zone. The fake communications bearing General Cole's codes had to originate somewhere. If I can trace them back to their source, we will find our evidence. You will have whatever resources you require. Colonel Grant leaned forward and his eyes were hard. And the extraction, the station Eternal Accord, is one of the most heavily defended positions in Council space. Security forces from a dozen species patrol those corridors. That is why you are here, Colonel. Your ghosts are the best at what they do. I need you to find a way inside. Grant smiled, but there was no warmth in it. My people have been studying the station blueprint since the General was arrested. We have found 3 possible entry points through the maintenance tunnels. The Council thinks those areas are too small for anyone to use, but they have never seen what a human can do when properly motivated. President had authorized resources beyond anything humanity had deployed before. 12 stealth cruisers would slip through Council space and gather intelligence. 2 carrier groups would position themselves just outside Council territory and wait for the signal to move. And a single ship called the Quiet Step would carry Colonel Grant's team directly to the Eternal Accord station. The Quiet Step was a reconnaissance vessel designed to be invisible to sensors. It was small and fast and crewed by only 20 people. Captain Maria Santos commanded her, and she had spent 15 years learning how to fly through enemy space without being detected. She reviewed the mission parameters and with quiet confidence. We can get your team to the station, Colonel. Getting out will be the hard part. Leave that to us, Captain. Just be ready when we call. Meanwhile, on the station Eternal Accord, Cole sat in her cell and waited. The room was small with grey walls and a single bed and a window that looked out at the stars. She was allowed no visitors and no communication with Earth. Her guards spoke to her only when necessary, and they looked at her with contempt. But was not idle. She observed her guards and memorized their routines and noted every weakness in the station's security. She counted the seconds between patrol passes and studied the locks on her door. She did not know when rescue would come, but she intended to be ready. A young guard began bringing her meals personally, and he was different from the others. His name was, and he belonged to a species called they were a client species of the Council and often looked down upon by the elder races, had gentle eyes, and he seemed uncomfortable with his duties. He asked her questions about Earth and humanity and why she had become a soldier, saw no harm in honestly. "I wanted to protect people," she told him simply. "That is all I have ever wanted. When I was a young girl, I saw suffering in the world, and I decided that I would spend my life standing between the innocent and those who would harm them." Looked troubled, and he glanced at the door before speaking quietly. "The evidence against you seems very convenient. I am not supposed to think such things, but I do." Smiled gently. "Sometimes thinking forbidden thoughts is the first step toward the truth. The Council says you are a monster. They say humans are savages who pretend to be civilized. And what do you think?" He was silent for a long moment. "I think you are the first person who has ever asked my name. They do not consider my kind worth knowing." "Then they are fools. Every person is worth knowing. That is something humanity learned long ago." Back on Earth, Commander Lisa Porter made a breakthrough. She traced the fake communications to a relay station in the neutral zone that was supposed to be abandoned. When she dug deeper into old records and shipping manifests, she discovered that the station had been secretly reactivated 6 months ago. The equipment had been purchased through a corporation with direct ties to High himself. "He manufactured the evidence personally," she reported to Admiral Hayes. "This was never about justice. It is about keeping humanity subordinate. Feared that we were growing too influential, and he decided to make an example of our most respected leader." Admiral Hayes studied the data, and his jaw tightened with anger. "Can we prove this beyond doubt?" "I need to access the station's records directly. But yes, Admiral, if we can get that data, we will have proof that the Council's own leader framed an innocent woman. Then we do not just rescue the general, we expose the whole conspiracy to the galaxy." The plan grew more complex and more dangerous. The stakes were higher than anyone had imagined, but humanity had never backed down from a challenge, and they would not start now. Admiral Hayes looked at his team and saw determination in every face. These were the best humanity had to offer, and they would not fail. 2 weeks, he said quietly. "We have 2 weeks to save our general and show the galaxy who we really are. Let us get to work." The trial began with all the ceremony that the Galactic Council could muster. Representatives from 300 species filled the Grand Chamber of Eternal Accord, and every seat was occupied. Holographic broadcasts carried the proceedings to trillions of viewers across the galaxy, and everyone wanted to see the human general brought low. High stood at the center of the chamber in his flowing robes, and his crystalline body pulsed with satisfaction. This was his moment of triumph. After today, humanity would never again challenge the authority of the elder races. Cole was brought into the chamber in restraints, and guards walked on either side of her. She wore her military uniform, which had been cleaned and pressed because she had insisted upon it. If she was going to face false justice, she would do so with dignity. She stood alone in the accused circle and looked up at the assembled species without fear. Under council law, the accused was denied legal representation. The elders claimed that truth could only be discerned when the accused spoke for themselves without the interference of advocates. In reality, it was simply another way to ensure that those without power could not defend themselves. Presented the evidence with theatrical flourish. He displayed the communications bearings, authorization codes, and read selected passages aloud. He showed sensor logs that supposedly placed human ships near the colonies during the attacks. He brought forth survivors who, with tears in their eyes, that they had seen Earth vessels raining fire upon their homes. "The evidence is clear," declared. "This woman ordered the deaths of 200,000 innocent. She did so to expand human territory and satisfy the endless hunger of her savage species. The Council must deliver justice." When it was turned to speak, she stood straight and tall. She looked not at the Council, but at the broadcast cameras that carried her image across the stars. "I did not order these attacks," she said clearly, and her voice echoed through the chamber. "I was on Earth when they occurred. I was at my daughter's wedding celebrating love and family while innocent people died. But I know who did order these attacks, and humanity knows who did. The question is whether this council wants truth or merely the appearance of justice." Laughed, and the sound was like wind chimes in a storm. "The human threatens us with empty words. She has no evidence. She has only the desperate lies of a guilty soul." At that precise moment, Commander Lisa Porter's team executed their mission. The Quiet Step had arrived at the station 12 hours earlier, and Porter's specialists had spent that time infiltrating the Council's own broadcast system. They worked through maintenance access points and bypassed security protocols that had not been updated in centuries, because the elder races never imagined anyone would dare attack their communications. Across the galaxy, viewers suddenly saw a second feed appear alongside the trial coverage. A calm human voice began to speak. The following evidence was obtained from Relay Station 7 in the neutral zone. This station was secretly reactivated 6 months ago by a corporation owned by the family of High. The display showed records and financial documents and sensor data that could not be faked. It showed operatives transmitting the false communications that bore codes. It showed payment records linking family to the mercenary ships that had actually attacked the colonies. It showed internal messages where himself discussed the need to humble humanity before they grew too powerful. The chamber erupted in chaos. Species that had long resented dominance saw proof of what they had always suspected. The elder races were not impartial judges but manipulators who shaped galactic affairs to benefit themselves. Representatives shouted at each other and some demanded immediate arrest while others defended him. Stood calmly in the accused's circle and watched the pandemonium unfold around her. She had known that her people would come. She had never doubted them for a moment. Screamed for the broadcast to be cut. Guards rushed toward with weapons drawn because they assumed she was somehow responsible for the chaos, and then the lights went out. Colonel Samuel Grant and his ghosts had infiltrated the station through maintenance tunnels just as they had planned. They had waited in the darkness for hours, and they had listened to the trial through their communication devices. When the evidence was broadcast, they moved to the power systems and disabled the lights throughout the central section of the station. In the darkness, they moved with precision born from decades of training. Their night vision equipment showed them everything while their enemies stumbled blindly. They reached the grand chamber in less than 2 minutes. Felt a hand on her arm, and a voice spoke quietly near her ear. "General Cole, we are here to take you home." She recognized the voice of Colonel Grant, and she allowed herself a small smile. "I was wondering when you would arrive, Colonel. You cut it rather close." "We wanted dramatic timing, ma'am. Seemed appropriate." The ghosts moved through the station like shadows with at their center. They encountered resistance from Council security forces, but the ghosts had trained for exactly this kind of operation. They used non-lethal methods when possible and lethal force when necessary, and they were always efficient. Every movement was practiced, and every decision was made in an instant. They reached the docking bay where the quiet step waited with engines ready, but before they could board saw a familiar face in the shadows. It was the young guard who had brought her meals and asked her questions about humanity. He stood near the door controls and he could have raised an alarm. He could have called for help and trapped them in the bay. Instead, he stepped aside and pressed the button that opened the docking port. "Go," he said quietly, "and tell your people that not all of us believe the Council's lies." Paused despite the urgency of the moment. She gripped his hand firmly. "When this is over, find a way to contact Earth. We protect our friends, always." Then she was aboard the quiet step, and Captain Maria Santos was already lifting off. The station's weapons powered up too slowly, and the quiet step was gone before anyone could fire. They vanished into the darkness between stars and set course for home. Behind them, the Galactic Council descended into crisis. The truth was out. Nothing would ever be the same. The extraction of coal was only the beginning of a crisis that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. As the quiet step raced toward the border of Council space, the universe was watching and waiting to see what would happen next. Admiral William Hayes moved the carrier groups into position just outside Council territory. 12 massive warships with their support vessels formed a wall of steel and firepower that no one could ignore. They did not cross the border because humanity did not want war, but they made their presence known. Every sensor in Council space could see them waiting. The Council's response came within hours. High had been temporarily removed from his position while the other elders investigated the evidence against him, but the remaining leaders were furious. They demanded that humanity surrender General Cole immediately and submit to harsh sanctions for violating Council space. They threatened complete economic isolation and military action if Earth did not comply. President Daniels' response was broadcast on every frequency that humanity could reach. He stood in the White House press room with the flags of Earth and the United Nations behind him, and he spoke with quiet determination. The Galactic Council has demonstrated that it values control over justice and power over truth. High manufactured evidence against an innocent woman to humiliate humanity and remind us of our place among the stars. He orchestrated the deaths of 200,000 civilians and blamed us for his crimes. This is not justice, this is tyranny. He paused and let his words sink in before continuing. Humanity will not surrender an innocent woman to satisfy the political ambitions of corrupt officials. We stand ready to defend ourselves against any aggression, but we do not seek war. We seek only what every species deserves: the right to be judged fairly, the right to present evidence the right to be treated as equals rather than subordinates. If the Council cannot provide these basic rights, then the Council has lost its moral authority to lead. The message spread across the galaxy than any ship could travel. Species that had lived under Council rule for millennia heard a small young species speak words that many had thought but never dared to say. The Council's military arm was dominated by warships, and they began mobilizing for a punitive strike against Earth. For 48 hours, the galaxy held its breath and waited to see if the first war in 3 centuries would erupt. Trading ships halted their journeys and diplomatic channels burned with frantic messages, and ordinary citizens on 100 worlds looked up at the stars and wondered if they would see fire falling from the sky. But something unexpected happened. The delegation announced that they were from Council proceedings in protest. Their ambassador stood before the assembly and spoke with a courage that surprised everyone, including himself. "We have served the Council faithfully for generations," he said. "We accepted our place among the lesser species because we believed the elder races were wise and just. We were wrong. The evidence against humanity proves that the Council is corrupt. We will not participate in injustice any longer." Within hours, 4 other species followed the example. The whose colonies had actually suffered the attacks released a statement saying they believed humanity's evidence and demanded a new investigation into the true perpetrators. They had lost loved ones in the flames, and they would not see an innocent woman punished while the real killers went free. I found his coalition crumbling beneath his feet. He had expected the galaxy to rally behind the elder races as they always had before. Instead, species that had never questioned Council authority were now openly defying it. The power of the elders had always rested on the illusion of moral superiority, and humanity had shattered that illusion in front of everyone. On the quiet step, Cole finally had time to rest. They were deep in friendly space now, and the immediate danger had passed. Colonel Grant found her in the observation deck, and she was watching the stars streak past the viewport. "You could have escaped on your own," he said as he joined her. "I saw how you had the guard rotations. You knew their schedules better than they did." Smiled but did not look away from the stars. "Probably. I had 3 different escape plans depending on how things developed, but this was never about me, Colonel. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity does not abandon its own. That message required a rescue." "You planned this. You wanted to be captured." "I trusted that my people would come. I made sure I would be ready when they did. And I knew that when the galaxy saw humanity risk everything to save one woman, they would understand what kind of species we truly are." Grant shook his head slowly. "That is either brilliant or insane." "In my experience, Colonel, those are often the same thing." The ship reached Earth space to a hero's welcome. Thousands of vessels had gathered to escort the quiet step home, and their running lights blinked in celebration. His daughter Emma was waiting on the orbital platform, and she ran to her mother the moment the airlock opened. Emma was crying as she embraced. "I knew you would come home. I never stopped believing." "I always will," replied and held her daughter tight. "Nothing in this universe could keep me from you." Admiral Hayes was there as well, and he stood at attention until approached him. Then the formal military bearing broke, and he embraced his old friend. "You scared me half to death," he said quietly. "Someone had to show these aliens what humanity is made of. Bill, might as well be me." They walked together through the orbital station while crowds cheered and reporters shouted questions. Answered none of them. She had said everything she needed to say through her actions. But even as she reunited with her family, knew that the real work was just beginning. The Council's power had been shaken but not broken. The elder races would not accept their humiliation quietly, and despite his disgrace still had allies who shared his hatred of humanity. The war might have been avoided today, but the struggle for humanity's place among the stars was far from over. Looked out at the blue curve of Earth below, and she made herself a promise. She would see this through to the end, no matter what it cost. 6 months after Cole's rescue, the galaxy looked very different than it had before. The old certainties that had governed interstellar civilization for millennia were gone, and something new was rising to take their place. The Galactic Council still existed, but its authority had fractured beyond repair. 14 species had formally withdrawn from Council membership, and they refused to recognize the elder races as their rulers any longer. These species formed a new coalition called the Free Worlds Alliance, and humanity was invited to be a founding member. President accepted the invitation without hesitation. Earth's ambassador to the new alliance would need to be someone respected by all the member species, someone who had proven their courage and their integrity, someone the whole galaxy had watched stand tall against injustice. He offered the position to General Cole. She accepted, but not before declining another offer first. The Joint Chiefs had wanted to promote her to Supreme Commander of all Earth military forces. It was the highest the military could bestow, and she had earned it 10 times over. "I am 60 years old," she told President when she turned down the promotion. "I have spent my whole life fighting. It is time to let younger officers take the lead. They have learned from my example and they will do better than I ever could." "And diplomacy, that is not fighting." Smiled, "Diplomacy is fighting with words instead of weapons. I still have plenty of fight left in me, Mr. President. I would simply prefer to use it building something rather than destroying something." Her first official act as ambassador was welcoming the as full members of the Free Worlds Alliance. The ceremony was held on a neutral station, and representatives from all 14 member species attended. The young guard named stood proudly in the delegation, and his eyes shone with emotion when approached him. "You took a great risk for me," she said, and clasped his hand warmly. "You could have raised the alarm, you could have been the hero who captured the escaping humans. Instead you opened the door and let us go." Bowed his head slightly. "You showed me that doing what is right matters more than following orders. My people have lived under the Council's shadow for too long. We accepted their contempt because we believed we deserved it. You showed us another way. Your people never deserved contempt, no one does. I know that now, Ambassador, because of you." The Free Worlds Alliance grew stronger with each passing month. Trade agreements were signed and mutual pacts were established. Species that had never worked together before found common ground in their shared rejection of Council tyranny. Earth became a hub of commerce and diplomacy, and human ships traveled routes that had once been closed to them. Hai had been removed from his position permanently after an investigation confirmed his role in fabricating the evidence against. The crystalline beings could not deny the truth when it was broadcast across the galaxy for all to see. Now faced trial before his own people, and the charges against him included murder and conspiracy and abuse of power. Took no pleasure in his downfall. She had never sought revenge. She had only wanted justice, and justice had been served. Admiral William Hayes retired from active duty, and he spent his days writing his memoirs and tending a garden at his home in Virginia. He had spent 40 years among the stars, and he was content to watch the flowers grow. Colonel Samuel Grant received a promotion to general, and he continued training the next generation of special operators. The Ghosts had proven themselves in the most important mission of their existence, and young soldiers competed fiercely for the of joining their ranks. Commander Lisa Porter became head of the new Allied Intelligence Network. She coordinated information between all the free worlds, and her analysts worked around the clock to protect the Alliance from threats, both internal and external. Captain Maria Santos took command of a new class of stealth cruiser, and she patrolled the borders of Alliance space with quiet vigilance. The Quiet Step had been retired to a museum, but its spirit lived on in every ship that carried humans into the darkness. But the story that mattered most happened quietly and away from politics and history. On a spring evening on Earth, she sat in her daughter Emma's garden and watched her play in the grass. They were 5 and 7 years old, and they ran in circles and laughed with pure joy. Their names were Daniel and Sophie, and they called her Grandma. Emma brought her tea and sat beside her on the bench. The sun was setting, and the sky was painted in shades of orange and purple. "Do you regret any of it?" Emma asked softly. "The years of service, the sacrifices, the cell on that station where you waited alone?" Considered the question carefully. She thought about the battles she had fought and the friends she had lost. She thought about the nights she had missed with her family because duty called her to distant stars. She thought about the cold grey walls of her cell on eternal accord and the uncertainty of those long days. "I regret the necessity," she finally said. "I wish the galaxy was kinder. I wish trust came easier between species. I wish no one had to fight for justice because justice was simply given to everyone who deserved it." She paused and watched little Sophie tackle her brother in the grass. "But I do not regret what I did or who I became. Every choice I made led me here to this moment with you and the children. How could I regret that?" Emma leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "Dad would be proud of you. He always was, even when I drove him crazy." They sat together as the sun finished its descent and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. 2 generations of a family that had endured everything the galaxy could throw at them. In the years that followed, historians would debate the significance of what they called the Cole Affair. Some argued it was the moment humanity proved itself worthy of galactic respect. Others said it revealed the fundamental instability of the council system that had governed the stars for so long. A few claimed it was simply a political crisis that happened to resolve peacefully. But those who had lived through it knew the truth. When the Galactic Council had targeted their general, humanity had launched an operation that changed everything, not through superior firepower or ruthless aggression, but through determination and loyalty and an unwillingness to sacrifice the innocent for political convenience. That was humanity's message to the stars. We protect our own, we stand against injustice, we do not bow to tyrants no matter how ancient or how powerful. And the galaxy never forgot it.